From the Dominion Post, in Morgantown, West Virginia, this is the Postcast, the audio companion to the Dominion Post newspaper. In this episode, we remember Morgantown's unofficially official ambassador and an update on the state's coronavirus response. I'm your host, Chris Schultz, and these are the week's top stories. On March 27th, Fred Fawcett died from complications from congestive heart failure. If you grew up in Morgantown, or have lived here over the past 20 years, it's likely that you saw him, somewhere in town, straddling his patented bicycle with the trailer in the back. You knew him, even if you didn't. I'm joined now by Dominion Post reporter Jim Bissett. Jim, for those of us that are unfamiliar, can you give us an idea of who exactly Fred Fawcett was?
Yeah, Fred was this gracious, gregarious little guy who was just part of the proceedings in Morgantown. If there was a public event, Fred was going to be there, and he was going to be there volunteering. If it meant picking up trash after a parade, or if it meant, putting tables in the back of a van or something like that. Anything that Fred could do to help, to be part of things, he was going to be there.
You mentioned the parades, and what other kind of events would you have been likely to see Fred at helping out?
The thing that, when I first met Fred, this was probably, it's going on 25 years ago now, at the old St. Teresa Church in Morgantown. It's down from the downtown campus, and I think WVU St. John's, has a facility now, but every Sunday morning, parishioners would conduct a food ministry. They called it Sarah's Table. It was a scrambled egg breakfast, and they would serve it up for the city's less fortunate. I got to know Fred because he would always bounce on the door, on Sunday morning. He would be there, and he knew all the volunteers by name. He knew a lot of the people who were coming down, to partake of the meal. He knew them, too. But what Fred would do, I called it a little act of amazing grace, because what he did was he would go directly to the kitchen, and he would say, okay, what can I do to help? And he would make sure, whatever they asked of him, he would do, and he would volunteer on his own to do a lot of stuff. He would serve, people at the table, and he wouldn't sit down and eat himself until the last person was served. And then immediately after he was done with his breakfast, he would spring back up, go back into the kitchen, hey, I'm back, tell me what I need to do. He would bus tables, he would sweep floors, move tables around. He saw it as a bunch of good people were getting together, and they were making a meal for him. So he was going to do his part. He was going to help them because he was just full of appreciation for what people did for him.
Jim, what do you think motivated Fred to get so involved and, as you say, conduct these little acts of amazing grace?
Fred was a guy, he was born in, 1952 in Preston County, West Virginia. There were a lot of kids. I think he was the third of 8 children. There wasn't a whole lot of money to go around. Fred was born with, he had some cognitive impairments. So Fred could have been a guy who just could have been shunted off to one side because that's just how it was. But Fred, I think maybe, through his parents and just through his personality, he turned himself into probably the original mainstream student, where he graduated high school. He had a couple of menial jobs along the way, and he just got to know people. He got to know policemen, firemen, people in authority, doctors, lawyers. Fred had a big circle of friends.
So, Jim, now that Fred has passed, what do you think it means for a community like Morgantown to have lost someone like Fred?
Fred brought out the best in people, and unconditional love even, because they wanted him to succeed. And he, in turn, he wanted to succeed himself, because he didn't want to let the people down who were helping him. I know there were a couple of episodes early in Fred's life as a young man where he had a bout with drinking that was pretty serious. He had a scrape with the law. There was a couple minor acts of vandalism that weren't that serious. You look at it, historically, but he still got in trouble over it. And a lot of people, because he had all these people in his life, they were saying to him, "Fred, come on, you're a good guy. You're better than this. Don't go down this avenue." And I think after that, he was going to be inclined to want to reach out and help anyway. And I think he really stepped it up after that, because then he knew he was lucky that he had these people in his life. Fred would probably say, "Help your neighbor." And he'd probably kind of laugh about it. And he would probably, I'm guessing that, I know Fred, he wasn't about hoarding toilet paper. He was about saying, "What can I do to help?" In whatever form that is. And I think Fred's a good lesson for all of us. I know that one of his longtime friends, Eleanor Green, whom I talked to for the story, she said that she liked the idea of all these people being there for Fred from all these different groups and different walks, and she liked the idea that Fred so much appreciated that. And she said it was just part of what a community should be. And I think I agree with her too. So,
Well, Jim, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us about your friend Fred. I really appreciate it.
Well, Chris, thank you for having me. I hope all is well.
Every weekday for the past 3 weeks, Governor Jim Justice and his advisors have held public briefings about West Virginia's response to coronavirus. It is in these briefings that the governor has announced executive orders, addressed new developments, and taken questions from the press. The Dominion Post knows it can be difficult for anyone to keep up with such a regular stream of information. So here now is a short discussion on some of the more recent issues addressed in the governor's briefings. I'm joined now by Dominion Post reporter David Beard. David, the governor has been holding these daily press briefings for almost 3 weeks now, maybe even a full month. You have been in on those calls with the governor and his advisory board, asking questions directly to them. One of the bigger issues that has come out of these press briefings just last week is the question of school closure. West Virginia, as of right now, is set to send its students back to school on April 30th. We have, I think at the last count that I saw, 14 states in the country that have officially ordered their schools closed, with 3 more strongly advising their schools to be closed for the remainder of the year. Last week, we had some legislative leaders come out and urge the governor to do so. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about why those legislative leaders want schools to be closed now?
Yeah, sure. And those leaders, just to name them, are the Senate, or identify them, are the Senate President and the Senate Minority Leader, Republican and Democrat. And the House Speaker and the House Minority Leader also are Republican Democrat. So we've got both parties represented by their leadership expressing this desire. And what they're thinking is that returning to school April 30th, when we've put off the primary election till June 9th, is that why are we bringing kids back to these schools, which are often polling places, and jamming them together in classrooms in close quarters, when we're reluctant to bring our seniors into those places and expose them to the virus? Bringing kids together, kids can carry the virus without knowing it. They don't show any symptoms. They could share it among themselves. They could spread it to their teachers, their other adults in the building. They could bring it back home to their parents and especially to their grandparents. And the legislative leaders just don't see it right that they're going to create this Petri dish situation when the government has felt like it's not wise to hold an election.
Right. We closed schools for a reason when we did, and they've remained closed for a reason. So what has Governor Justice's stated reason been for not officially closing schools for the rest of the year?
He and the State Superintendent of Schools, Clayton Birch, believe that students really want to have an opportunity to get together for at least a couple weeks before summer break kicks in and especially the older students, the seniors, want to have an opportunity to graduate together. And they just see this, they call it a sliver of hope that they can get together for the last couple of weeks. And that they believe that the kids are counting on the adults to offer them that hope. The governor said that as far as making a decision, it's not time yet because we've got till the 30th. We could kind of see how the virus trends out over the next couple of weeks and make a decision by then. And he's said that he relies on his medical experts to tell him whether reopening the schools will be right or wrong. And so far they're not telling him to keep them closed. So that's where he stands.
So I guess we'll have to, with the rest of the state, wait and see what they decide on that particular topic. Moving on, I know that on Thursday you directly asked a question to the panel about testing and more specifically about the rate of results, how quickly people are getting their results back. What did you hear from the panel as far as the improvements or the situation in getting people their coronavirus test results back?
Yeah, what prompted my question was that I've actually received emails from a number of people who are dismayed because tests are taking so long. Dr. Clay Marsh, the coronavirus czar, mentioned today that tests are still taking as long as 12 days to come back from the private labs. What was explained to me by Marsh and Kathy Slemp, Bureau of Public Health Commissioner, was that originally all the testing had to go through the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. Shortly after that, the state labs were allowed to perform them, and then that branched out to the private labs, particularly LabCorp and Quest, the two biggest national labs. The private labs pretty much got overwhelmed by the demand. You're talking thousands or hundreds of thousands of tests across the country. I don't know the exact number. So they just couldn't turn the results around quick enough. And they've had to develop a test out of the blue in just a few weeks because there had been no test for the virus. So now that the labs are getting geared up and catching up, they're opening new facilities across the country and closer to the areas where the tests are coming from. And so they're starting to trim down that backlog. We're down to 7 days max for test results. And the official told me that they're going to keep expanding out, opening some more facilities so that they can just keep trimming away that turnaround time. And there's a pharmaceutical company called Abbott that's developed a test. I don't know what the test is called, but it's super fast. It can let you know that the test is positive within 5 seconds and let you know the test is negative within 13 seconds. And Abbott's making that test available to the states. West Virginia already has some. Slemp told me that when they get an increased supply of these, they want to roll them out, and they have two goals. One of them is to just expand local availability to get all the communities faster turnaround, and the other one is that they want to deploy them out mobily for when there's an outbreak. They want to get these tests right out to that outbreak area and do a quick turnaround to find out what's going on.
Good. Well, I mean, obviously, as we all know, waiting for any kind of medical test result to come back is a harrowing experience, and I can't imagine that it's any easier in the current situations. This week, we do have a very unique situation in that we have quite a few different religious holidays coming up. Just last night was the start of Passover, the Jewish holiday. On Sunday, we have Easter. Coming up here very soon, we have Ramadan beginning. All of these holidays traditionally call for large group gatherings, which is something that we can't have right now. What has the governor and his advisors, how have they suggested that people respond to these religious gatherings in the time of coronavirus?
They've all said explicitly don't do it, and Kathy Slemp re-emphasize that. Even though you want to gather together, you really shouldn't. And we're thinking of two different kind of things with all these faiths. One is that you're going to be gathering for worship, and one gathering to share meals. In terms of worship services, Slump recommended some alternative like conference call, phone-based communication, getting together for some kind of online virtual service, or maybe even a drive-in. I know Governor Justice mentioned that previously, and she mentioned that again today, is the idea of everybody congregating in the church parking lot, or whatever your facility is called, parking lot, communicating with each other by phone or radio, and not getting out and hugging or doing whatever even talking, but keeping that distance, even though you're kind of congregated in the same place. They haven't mentioned anything really as far as sharing meals, and I don't know how that would go. I mean, a lot of these celebrations are food-based. Families get together, whole congregations get together. So I think that would require some creative thinking by the families and by the leaders of those faith communities and how they would enjoy that time.
So I'm really sorry to have to ask this question, but I think it's necessary, especially as you mentioned just there, your Passover Seders, your Easter dinners, your Ramadan iftars are all situations that call for people to come together. The longer we are all in isolation, the more likely I feel that it becomes more difficult for an individual to resist that temptation to get together with their family or with their congregation. What has the governor, what has this panel said as far as the enforcement aspect of this isolation, the stay-in-place order? Have they given any indication as to what their enforcement plans would be if people defy the order?
They haven't. They've addressed enforcement rather broadly in terms of people coming in from out of state to go to the golf courses or to just take up residence here to escape their hot spot in New York City or whatever area they're coming from that might have a higher infection rate than we do. And they've talked about that if a resident sees someone from out of state who's fled here and is not self-quarantining for 14 days to contact their local authorities, and those people could see a visit from state police to, urge them to self-quarantine or face an obstruction of justice charge. But in terms of social distancing for church and even shopping, they're counting on our good faith and our common sense to protect ourselves and protect our community. I made Adjutant General James Hoyer angry a week or so ago by raising that question and suggesting that, some people aren't going to exercise good faith. He believes they are. I think to most extent they are, but I saw an experience in a store I won't name just the other night, in fact, just yesterday, where there are signs all over that particular store saying, keep your distance, et cetera, et cetera. And within eyeshot of those signs, a store clerk was standing just 2 feet away from a couple who were checking out, and they were conversing that close together. Obviously offer, easy opportunity to share those germs, those virus germs. And there was no manager coming over there and separating them. So good faith, common sense is all that we have for this, and obviously some people aren't going to exercise that. But the leaders have said over and over again they are relying on the majority of us to do that, to think about protecting ourselves and our community.
All right, David. Well, here's hoping, right? I just want to thank you for being the one on our staff who sits through those calls every day and asks the important questions. And especially I want to thank you for taking the time to call in and speak with me here today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and good talking to you. Thanks.
That's all for this week's episode. The links to all the stories we discuss are also in the description of this episode on your podcasting app. If you haven't already, subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We would also really appreciate it if you would take the time to rate and review us. Nobody's exactly sure why, but a rate and a review combo really goes a long way to boost the show. Be sure to check out our sports podcast, Best of 7. Despite the quarantine and all sports being on hiatus, Andrew and Sean are still regularly putting out episodes. You can also check out our local history podcast, All About History. Episode 3, all about the Confederate raid on Morgantown during the Civil War, is up now. We want to hear from you. Do you like the show? Do you hate the sound of my voice? Is it too loud? Is it too quiet? Let me know. Email podcast@dominionpost.com, or you can reach out on any of the Dominion Post social media. We're Dominion Post, WV, on Twitter, Dominion Post _WV on Instagram, or go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Dominion Post WV. Tweet directly at me if you like. I'm at Schultz Reports on Twitter. That's SCHULZ. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Wash them hands.